Guys, it's Wednesday, and I gotta tell you, I still haven't gotten over the fact that Tim Tszyu lost to Sebastian Fundora on Saturday. Now, I know a lot of you guys will be saying, come on, it's Wednesday. The fight was a few days ago. Get over it. Let's get on to the next one. But I'm still upset. I still wanted Tim to get it done and become a double champion. And unfortunately, that didn't turn out to be what happened. But here's the thing. It's now especially important to get the next steps correct, because losing once is not as big of a deal as losing twice, potentially back-to-back, and having to rebuild your career nearly from scratch with your reputation in tatters. And that's what I believe could potentially happen if the Sebastian Fundora rematch was to go wrong. So my advice to Tim Tszyu, contrary to what I've actually been saying in the comments, I've changed my mind, is that Tim Tszyu should avoid taking the rematch as his next fight. Now, why is that the case? Well, because in my opinion, if you look at boxing history, there are numerous examples just in the last few years of fighters who went into the fight as the favorite, got upset, took the rematch arguably too soon, ended up paying the price, and derailing their careers further than they already did. So I'm talking about Alexander Usyk beating Anthony Joshua once, and then AJ taking the rematch, suffering a second defeat, and then having to rebuild his career. We saw the same thing happen to Joe Joyce, and albeit he wasn't the favorite, but George Kambosos, Tim Tszyu's fellow Australian, he ended up in a similar position with his back-to-back defeats to Devin Haney. And again, that second defeat could have arguably been avoided by taking a different path. So I'm saying Tim Tszyu needs to be careful. He doesn't want to end up like those fighters. What he wants to do is respect Sebastian Fundora. Because from my point of view, the cut didn't help. But the cut wasn't 6'6" and jabbing Tim Tszyu repeatedly from the outside. That was Sebastian Fundora. Sebastian Fundora was showing outside discipline and the ability to avoid getting into inside exchanges and the ability to use his height, his reach, all his God-given assets to a level that I didn't believe he was capable of doing because I'd never seen it before in any of his fights. And he did that on just a few short days' notice. So the problem is, if he can adjust his game plan on a short notice fight, give Tim Tszyu a lot of problems, then you know he's gonna be able to do the same or potentially even worse in the rematch. And I'm also not 100% sure that Tim Tszyu won't be suffering some residual negative effects from the first fight. You see, in my opinion, if you look at Tim in the corner, when that cut happened, if you look at how he came out of his corner, he looked a bit like he was in shock in some of those situations, okay, guys? He did, and I love Tim Tszyu. I think he's great, but I do honestly believe he looked like he was in a little bit of shock. He looked like he didn't know what to do with the blood pouring down his face. He'd never been in a situation like that before, and I don't think he did a very good job of adjusting his game plan to combat what Sebastian Fundora was doing. So I think he needs to respect the fact that the rematch is not just going to be, in my opinion, a knockover job, despite the fact that Tim Tszyu was doing extremely well in the first fight, but he was beaten by a credible world championship level fighter, and I think now he needs to respect that, go back to the drawing board, much like Lennox Lewis did after he suffered a defeat, and rebuild rather than rushing into an immediate rematch straight away and potentially compounding one disastrous defeat with another. So the question becomes, what should Tim Tszyu do instead? Well, in fact, my opinion is that he should take on a journeyman level or at least a lower level of opposition from Fundora, a fight that has relatively little risk in order to rebuild his confidence, but more importantly than that, to actually get in the gym and start working on some of the techniques that he could use to potentially combat what Fundora was doing in the first fight. So maybe even find a taller, you're not going to find exactly Sebastian Fundora, but if you can find a taller, rangier fighter who isn't going to present as much of a challenge, get in there against that guy and work on some of the things that Tim Tszyu needs to do in the rematch, and just make sure that he's not suffering, as I say, any residual mental problems from the first fight where he just doesn't have his confidence, whatever the case may be. Tim looks like an exceptionally tough guy mentally to me from the outside, but we just want to make sure that those things get ironed out before rushing into the rematch. So that's why I say caution, don't go back straight into it. Instead, try and find the closest you can get to a tall, rangy fighter who isn't going to present huge problems, try and get a win back in the win column in a lower profile fight, and then, and only then, target Sebastian Fundora in the rematch, possibly later in the year, possibly early next year. I don't think you need to rush. I think the most important thing is to get it right, make the changes that need to be made, improve the way the cuts are handled, improve all of these things, come back better and stronger for the rematch. So here's where you guys can help me out. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for names that Tim Tszyu can fight in the rematch who fit the criteria that I mentioned. I don't want to hear Errol Spence. I don't want to hear Terrence Crawford, because those fights shouldn't be on the radar at this point in time. I believe Tim Tszyu's probably not ready for those fights either. That would be a big mistake in my book. But let me know, guys, in the comments some realistic names, some names that would help Tim Tszyu rebuild his confidence, work on his skills, get a win back in the win column. Let me know in the comments, guys. Thank you as always for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.